She was building a shelter with broken boards for Christmas night. Her dead husband's brother stood watching. The Wyoming wind had a cruel habit of cutting straight through wool, leather, and bone. On that late December afternoon, with Christmas only 5 nights away, Evelyn Hart felt each icy gust like a personal test. She knelt in the snow beside the half-collapsed cabin that used to be a home, her skirt stiff with frost as she hammered a split board into the crooked frame of a makeshift shelter. The board wobbled. The nail bent. The wind snapped her hair into her eyes. Still she kept going. Her fingers, red and raw, trembled as she gripped the hammer. Even breathing hurt in the cold. The sky was bruising to a darker gray, the promise of another storm brewing along the mountain line. Evelyn braced the next board, her breath short and thin. "Steady, just steady," she whispered to herself. "One more board, Daniel. I'm trying." Saying her late husband's name aloud was both comfort and punishment. The whisper vanished quickly into the winter silence, yet something in the air shifted. Snow crunched. A shape blocked the pale light. Evelyn froze mid-hammer. Slowly she looked over her shoulder. There he stood, Silas Hart, her husband's older brother. His dark coat was dusted in snow, his gloved hands shoved into his pockets, his weather-beaten hat pulled low but not enough to hide the storm in his eyes. He had the same square jaw as Daniel, the same broad shoulders, but the years had hardened Silas, sharpening the edges grief had carved into him. She hadn't seen him in months. He hadn't written, hadn't visited, hadn't even sent word. Yet here he was, watching her, judging her, pitying her. She couldn't tell and she didn't want to know. Evelyn forced her attention back to the broken lumber. She lifted the hammer again, striking harder than she needed to. The board slipped, almost smacking her fingers. She hissed, steadying it. Silas didn't move, didn't offer help, didn't speak a word. Just stood there like a silent shadow, Daniel's shadow really, stirring all the pain she had fought so hard to bury. Her voice came out tight. "You here for a reason, Silas?" A long moment stretched between them, filled only by the sound of distant wind sweeping over the empty prairie. Finally, his low voice carried across the clearing. "You ain't building a shelter with those boards." Evelyn set her jaw. "It's what I have." Silas's gaze flicked over the bent nails, splintered planks, and the crooked structure she'd managed to raise. The look wasn't unkind, but it struck just the same. "You could have asked for help," he said. "I could have," she replied, hammering again, "if someone had given me reason to believe help was welcome." His silence thickened like the clouds overhead. A sudden gust ripped a loose board from the pile, sending it skidding across the frozen ground. Evelyn rushed after it, slipping once, catching herself before her knees hit the snow. She grabbed the board, her breath ragged as she stood. When she turned back, Silas had moved closer, close enough for her to see the tension in his jaw, the unspoken things behind his eyes. But he still said nothing. Evelyn marched past him without meeting his gaze and set the board down, forcing her hands to keep moving, even though they were shaking, even though she could feel the heaviness of his presence behind her, even though his watching made her chest tight with old wounds. Why now? Why here? Why after 2 long hollow years? The hammer slipped from her numb fingers, falling into the snow with a dull thud. Silas inhaled sharply as if to speak, but the words never came. Evelyn picked up the hammer once more, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut the winter air. "If you came to tell me how I'm doing everything wrong," she said, "I assure you I already know." Silas's eyes darkened, hurt, guilt, regret, it was all there. But still he didn't leave. And Evelyn, despite herself, felt a part of her tremble at the truth of it. Silas Hart had not shown up by accident. He was here for something. She just had no idea yet whether that something would break her further, or save her. The wind settled into an uneasy lull, the kind that felt more like the world catching its breath than true calm. Evelyn wiped her palms against her skirt and reached for another splintered plank, determined to ignore the figure standing behind her. But Silas Hart wasn't a man easily ignored. He stepped forward, his boots sinking into the thin crust of snow. "You're wasting strength trying to fix something that won't stand," he said, voice low, roughened by disuse or nerves, she couldn't tell. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on the crooked frame. "It only has to last the winter. That wood's rotten." "So am I," she muttered before she could stop herself. Silas's breath caught. She heard it, faint but undeniable. The sound rattled her more than the wind ever could. She rose, squaring her shoulders. "It's what I've got, Silas." He studied her in a way that made her skin prickle, not with fear but with old, unsettled familiarity. The Hart brothers had always been observers, Daniel with gentle curiosity, Silas with guarded intensity. That same intensity was on her now. It made her feel exposed. "You could have come to the ranch," Silas said finally. "There's space. Eat. Tools. Food." Evelyn let out a short, humorless laugh. "You haven't set foot here in a year, Silas? Why would I think your ranch door was open to me?" His jaw clenched. Snowflakes caught in his beard. "That wasn't about you. That's what people say when it's absolutely about you." Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the past rushed between them. Memories stitched with love, grief, and a harsh winter night 2 years ago when everything shattered. Daniel Hart, youngest brother. Her husband. Gone in a single brutal moment. Evelyn had replayed that night for months, imagining all the ways it could have gone differently. Silas had been with Daniel on the cattle run. Silas had brought back the body. Silas had taken the blame no matter how many times she told him it wasn't his fault. But grief is irrational. Family ties even more so. She swallowed hard. "You stopped writing, Silas? Not even a message through town? No word? No check-in? Nothing?" Silas's gaze drifted past her to the cabin that stood half-broken behind her. "I didn't think you wanted to see me." Evelyn's voice cracked despite her best effort. "You were the only heart I had left." Silas flinched, not dramatically but enough that Evelyn felt a stab of guilt. For a long moment neither spoke. A board on the half-built shelter rattled violently in a sudden gust. Evelyn jumped forward to brace it, slipping on a patch of ice. Her foot skidded out from under her. The world tilted. Before the snow could meet her face, a strong hand gripped her arm, steadying her. "Silas." His touch was calloused, warm despite the cold. Evelyn jerked back, breath unsteady. "I'm fine." "You almost weren't," Silas said, stepping closer. "You don't have to do all this alone." "I've been alone," she shot back. "And you?" She stopped, biting the inside of her cheek, forcing the words back before they made things worse. Silas's voice softened, surprisingly so. "Say it." "No. Evelyn." She lifted her chin. "You left me to grieve Daniel by myself. So yes, I do have to do all this alone." Silas looked like she'd struck him. The storm clouds thickened overhead, shadows stretching across the frozen ground. The air tasted of snow and unsaid words. Silas sucked in a breath, then spoke quietly. "I left because I couldn't look at you without remembering that I didn't get to him in time." Evelyn froze. Silas continued, voice strained. "I hear his shout every time I close my eyes. I see his horse buck. I see the fall. I replay it thinking, if I'd gone faster, if I'd been closer." His voice cracked. Silas' heart never cracked. "I should have saved him," he whispered. Evelyn felt something heavy inside her soften. Not toward romance, not yet, but toward truth. Toward understanding. She stepped closer, snow crunching softly beneath her boots. "Silas, I never blamed you. Not really. I blamed the world for taking him. I blamed myself for not being there. I blamed anyone I could because grief needed a target. But not you." He stared at her like he didn't quite believe her. Before either of them could say more, the wind shifted abruptly, colder, sharper, carrying the scent of the storm galloping their way. Silas glanced at the sky. "This weather's turning." Evelyn nodded. "I know. You'll freeze tonight if you stay in that half-built thing." "I'll manage." Silas stepped closer, towering but not intimidating, just deeply, painfully concerned. "Evelyn, let me help." She opened her mouth, but the wind howled before she could form words, whipping snow into their faces. Their past hung between them, unresolved but no longer as silent. And as the first flakes of the coming storm began to fall, Evelyn realized something unsettling. Silas hadn't just returned out of obligation. Something had driven him here. Something more complicated. More dangerous. More human. Something she wasn't ready to name. Not yet. The Wyoming sky darkened like ink spilled across parchment. What little daylight remained slipped behind fast-moving clouds, leaving the clearing in a gray, trembling half-light. Evelyn brushed snow from her eyelashes and forced her numb fingers to grip another board. The wind was growing sharper, cutting sideways, lifting the hem of her skirt, rattling every loose nail in the half-built shelter. She was racing a storm and losing. Behind her, Silas tightened the coil of rope he'd slung from his shoulder. He scanned the sky with the practiced eyes of a rancher who had survived a lifetime of brutal weather. "That storm's coming in faster than it should," Silas muttered. "It's not normal." "Nothing's been normal in a long time," Evelyn replied without looking at him. She tried fitting a broken plank against the warped frame, but it resisted her, twisting with the wind. Her hand slipped. The hammer fell again. Silas moved toward her. That piece won't hold. The grain split clean through. I don't have another, she said tightly. You will. Silas unslung the rope, walked to his wagon and pulled out a rough stack of solid boards, better than anything she'd been working with. Evelyn stared. You brought lumber? I didn't know what I'd find here, Silas said, eyes scanning the collapsed cabin. But I figured you'd need something. She swallowed hard, the weight of pride pressing on her chest. You're not staying, Silas? Just leave the wood. He raised one eyebrow, unimpressed. Not a chance. Before she could argue, a sudden blast of wind knocked the leaning frame sideways. Evelyn lunged, trying to brace it, but the structure shifted violently, swaying like it wanted to topple on top of her. Silas reacted fast, faster than she'd expected for a man his size. He grabbed the beam, setting his shoulder against it, anchoring the entire weight using his body. Evelyn, move, he grunted. She scrambled back as the frame shook. Snow swirled around them in a frenzy, the storm building its applause. Silas held firm until the wind eased, then stepped back, chest heaving. He shot her a look. Not angry. Not condescending. Just concerned. Deeply, painfully concerned. You're gonna kill yourself trying to build this in a blizzard, he said. Then help me, she snapped, breath shaking. He froze. Evelyn's eyes burned hot in the cold air, anger, fear, exhaustion mixing until her voice shook. You can't stand there telling me everything I'm doing wrong if you're not willing to put a hand to the work. You want to be here? Then be useful. Silas exhaled slowly, like he'd been waiting for her to say something, anything, that opened the door. He dropped his gloves in the snow. All right, he said quietly. Tell me where you want me. Those words. Something about them softened a tight place in her chest. Together, they lifted the broken boards away and replaced them with Silas's stronger lumber. The wind pushed at them, trying to topple their progress every few minutes, but they kept going, silently, tensely, stubbornly. Silas hammered with the precision of a man who'd spent his life building ranch structures in harsh seasons. Evelyn worked beside him, matching his rhythm despite her trembling hands. At one point, Silas placed a beam across the top of the frame and Evelyn climbed a small crate to help brace it. Ready? She called. Go ahead, he answered. They lifted. The beam resisted, then settled into place. Their breath steamed in the air between them, mingling briefly before the wind tore it apart. Silas stepped closer than he needed to be, steadying the beam near her hand. You're shaking, he said quietly. Evelyn stiffened. The cold does that. He hesitated. Not just the cold. She looked away quickly before he could search her face any deeper. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. Silas glanced skyward. We've got minutes, not hours. We need to stop. I can't stop, Evelyn whispered. If the storm traps me with no shelter. I didn't say give up, Silas interrupted gently. I'm saying we finish after the storm. The first pieces of sleet pinged off the nearby wagon, sharp as thrown pebbles. The storm had arrived. Silas stepped down from the frame, boots sinking into slush as the sky opened. Inside. Now. The cabin roof leaks, she protested. It's still 4 walls and a stove. Out here is suicide. The wind hit them side on, fierce enough that Evelyn staggered. Silas caught her before she fell, steadying her with a firm grip on her waist. For one startling moment, the world narrowed to the heat of his hands through her coat, the roughness of his breath, the unmistakable emotion in his eyes. Evelyn, he said, voice low, we need shelter. Together. She nodded, because the storm was too strong, because he was right, and maybe because she wanted to trust him more than she was willing to admit. They ran toward the cabin, snow and sleet lashing at their faces. Silas reached the door first and pushed it open, ushering her inside. The storm screamed behind them as the door shut. But inside the dim cabin, another storm, quieter, older, and far more dangerous, waited for them both. The cabin door slammed behind them with a force that rattled dust from the rafters. The sudden quiet inside felt almost unnatural, like stepping out of a raging river and into a still pool. The wind continued to shriek outside, but in here it was muffled, contained, distant. Evelyn brushed snow from her coat and shook the ice from her hair, teeth chattering. Silas stomped the slush off his boots and moved toward the corner table where a lantern waited, half filled with kerosene. He struck a match. The tiny flame bloomed, catching the dry wick. Warm amber light spread slowly across the room. It revealed everything Evelyn wished it hadn't. The broken rafters of the roof sagging overhead. The stove with its tiny pile of dwindling wood. The patched blanket she'd sewn more times than she could count. The loneliness embedded in every corner. Silas's eyes traveled over each detail, growing darker with each one. "Evelyn," he murmured, voice roughened by disbelief, "you been living like this?" She straightened her spine. "I've been getting by." "This isn't getting by." He walked toward the stove, lifted a log, examined it. "You rationing firewood? There's only so much left." Silas lowered the log slowly, like the weight of it offended him. He turned back to her, his expression sharpened by emotion he didn't voice. "You should have come to my ranch," he said softly. Evelyn stiffened immediately. "After you vanished for a year? After not a letter, not a word?" Silas looked away, jaw tightening. "It wasn't because I didn't care." "That's what you think you're saying," she replied, forcing her voice steady. "But that's not what it felt like." Silas blew out a long breath and set the lantern on the table. Its light flickered across his face, softening the lines etched there by hard years and harder guilt. He sank into the only chair in the room, Daniel's chair, and ran his hand over his beard thoughtfully. Evelyn hated how natural he looked there. How much he resembled Daniel in the dim light. How those memories hit her like a hammer to the ribs. She moved to the stove to warm her hands. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the storms pounding outside. Finally Silas spoke. "I didn't stay away because of you." "Yes, you did," she whispered. He blinked, startled by the quiet conviction in her words. Evelyn turned to face him, shadows flickering across her tired features. "You think grief only belongs to you," she said softly. "But you and I lost the same man." Silas swallowed. "Not the same way." "No. Not the same way," she agreed, voice trembling. "But you left me alone with it." Silas stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wood floor. His voice, usually controlled and low, rose with unguarded honesty. "I didn't stay away because I didn't care. I stayed away because I couldn't face what I'd failed to save." Evelyn's breath caught. Silas stepped closer, eyes burning with pain he'd carried far too long. "Every time I saw you, Evelyn, I remembered that I was supposed to protect him. I'm the older brother. I taught him to ride. I taught him the cattle paths. I was there that night. And I wasn't fast enough." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Silas shook his head, voice breaking slightly, something she had never heard from him. "I hear his shout every night. I hear the horse. I hear the fall. And I think, if I'd just reached him sooner." The sentence dissolved. He couldn't finish it. Evelyn stepped forward before she even realized she had moved. "Silas," she whispered, "he loved you. He trusted you. And it was an accident, terrible, senseless, but not your fault." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "It feels like my fault." The storm cracked above them, lightning splintering the sky. The cabin shuddered. Evelyn's voice grew softer still. "I know the weight of guilt. It doesn't lift easily. But shutting me out didn't make it lighter for either of us." Silas's eyes dropped to the floor. "I thought you hated me." Her breath hitched. "I thought you hated me." They stared at each other, two broken things that had both assumed the other was whole enough to walk away. A sudden gust slammed against the wall, rattling a loose shingle overhead. Snow hissed through a narrow break in the roof. Silas instinctively moved closer to her, scanning the rafters. "This place won't make it through the night," he murmured. Evelyn swallowed. "It survived worse. Not this storm." He reached past her to adjust the stove, close enough that she felt his warmth through her coat. Close enough that her breath faltered. When he straightened, his face was inches from hers. The lantern's glow painted both of them gold, the storm closing them inside the small, too-quiet cabin. Silas's voice dropped to a near whisper, thick with sincerity. "I didn't stay away because I didn't want you in my life, Evelyn. I stayed away because I thought I didn't deserve to be in yours." Her throat tightened. The truth of it, the vulnerability, hit her deeper than she expected. Evelyn blinked, letting the heat from the stove warm her freezing cheeks. "Maybe," she whispered, "we both deserve more than regret." Silas stared at her, the storm raging beyond the walls, his expression shifting in a way that frightened and steadied her at once. Because for the first time since Daniel's death, Silas wasn't looking at her like a widow he'd failed, but like someone he wasn't ready to lose. The storm broke sometime after dawn, leaving the Wyoming plains washed in brittle stillness. A pale sun climbed slowly above the horizon, turning the snow into a glittering sheet of diamonds. The world looked deceptively peaceful, quiet enough that Evelyn questioned whether the night before had even happened. But then she heard Silas outside. The rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. The scrape of lumber sliding against the wagon bed. The steady, unwavering efficiency of a man who had decided something in the dark hours of the storm. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped onto the frosted porch, what remained of it anyway. The air was crisp enough to sting her lungs. Silas stood near the wagon, breath misting as he worked. His coat hung open despite the cold, his shirt sleeves rolled past his forearms. He swung the axe with the ease of a man who had split wood every winter of his life. Each strike sent chips flying, each breath came heavy, controlled. He paused when he felt her watching. "You should be inside. Cold'll bite harder today," he said. Evelyn stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the snow. "Are you planning on rebuilding my entire shelter alone?" "No," Silas said, setting the axe aside. "Planning on doing it right with your help." There was no edge in his voice this time. No gruffness. Just calm certainty. Evelyn looked at the wagon, surprised to see it filled with straight, sturdy lumber, 10 times the quality of her broken scraps. "You brought all that?" "Went to fetch more before the storm hit full," he said. "Didn't want you stuck with rotten planks." Her breath caught slightly. "You could have stayed inside. Rested." Silas shook his head. "Rest is for when a job's finished." Evelyn studied him, the set of his shoulders, the quiet resolve in his eyes. She had known Silas Hart for years, but this version of him felt different. Less like the hardened rancher who kept everyone at arm's length, and more like the man Daniel used to speak of when he talked about his big brother with admiration. Silas handed her a small bundle of nails. "You ready?" "For what?" He nodded toward the half-built shelter. "To fix what's broken." Evelyn froze, not because of the work but because of the words. They felt pointed. "Met. True." She swallowed. "Yes, I'm ready." Together they walked toward the structure. A new rhythm. Silas steadied a beam while Evelyn hammered the nails, her hands steadier than they'd been in months. Silas adjusted the angles. Evelyn held the boards in place. It was clumsy at first, two people who hadn't worked together in a long time finding a rhythm. But as the minutes passed, it became smoother, easier. Not effortless, but shared. Every now and then, Silas would glance at her, checking her hands for signs of cold or strain. And Evelyn, much to her irritation, found herself noticing the way he moved, the quiet strength in every gesture. After an hour she finally asked, "Why are you really here, Silas?" He didn't answer immediately. He hammered the last nail into a reinforcing beam before speaking. "Because you deserve better than this," he said softly. "Better than freezing nights and broken boards. And you think you can give me that?" He met her eyes, something raw and honest showing through the frost clinging to his lashes. "I can try." Evelyn looked away quickly, heart stuttering. "Daniel wouldn't want you burdened." "This isn't a burden." Silas's voice deepened, gentled. "This, helping you, being here. Evelyn, it feels like the first thing I've done right in 2 years." The breeze stilled. The world went quiet. Evelyn's throat tightened. "You don't owe me anything, Silas." "I owe Daniel," he said, voice cracking briefly. "And maybe I owe myself a second chance too." He brushed his hand along the top beam to check its steadiness, then added, more softly than she'd ever heard from him. "And maybe I owe you something too." Evelyn's breath trembled. She didn't trust her voice, so she said nothing. An unexpected softness. By midday, the shelter stood taller and straighter than it ever had under Evelyn's hands alone. Silas wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold air. Evelyn leaned against the new doorway, catching her breath. "It's almost beautiful," she said. Silas gave her a rare, soft half-smile. "It'll be warm. That's what matters." A moment passed, quiet, fragile, suspended like frost on a winter branch. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "Silas, why did you bring so much lumber?" He hesitated, glancing toward the wagon. "I thought maybe you'd want to rebuild more than just the shelter." She blinked slowly, taken off guard. "Like the cabin?" "Maybe." He paused. "Or maybe just your life. A safer one. A warmer one." Evelyn's pulse beat unevenly. "Why?" she whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Silas stepped closer, not invading, just near enough that she felt the heat from him even in the cold air. "Because Daniel loved you," he said first. "And because," his voice lowered, "I see how hard you've been fighting just to survive. You deserve someone in your corner." Her breath hitched. "No one's been in my corner for a long time." Silas's gaze softened, almost painfully so. "You've got me now," he said. The word struck harder than any winter wind. For a moment, Evelyn had to close her eyes to steady herself. The shelter, finished, and something else begins. By late afternoon the shelter was complete, solid, reinforced and weatherproof. The lantern Silas hung inside cast a golden warmth across the fresh boards. Evelyn stood in the doorway, brushing her fingers along the smooth wood. "It's strong," she murmured. Silas nodded. "So are you." Evelyn looked at him sharply. "I don't feel strong." "That's because you always carry more weight than anyone should," he said. "Doesn't mean you're not strong." Her heart swelled, not romantically, not fully, but with something warmer than she'd felt since Daniel died. Silas took a breath, bracing himself. "Evelyn, you don't have to be alone anymore. Not unless you choose to be." She didn't answer right away. Her voice felt too fragile to trust. Instead, she stepped into the shelter, letting the warm lantern light hold her. Silas watched her from the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, eyes softening in a way that felt like the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. And as the winter sun dipped low, painting the snow in rose-gold light, Evelyn Hart realized something simple and terrifying. This shelter wasn't the only thing being rebuilt today. The morning after the storm was deceptively calm. The sky was a flat, pale blue and the snow lay heavy and luminous, lending everything an almost unreal stillness. Evelyn woke with a stiffness in her shoulders and a strange, small relief in her chest. The shelter had held. The world felt less like a threat and more like something she could face, one careful step at a time. Silas was already up. He'd stoked a small fire in the cabin stove and the smell of hot coffee drifted through the space as he moved quietly, bringing 2 tin cups over to the doorway where Evelyn sat on a crate, pulling wool around her hands. "You should stay inside," he said, handing her a cup. His voice was softer than it had been when he arrived, as if the storm had tempered something in him. She wrapped both hands around the metal, letting the warmth seep in. "You don't have to stick around, Silas. You did enough." "I did what I should have done months ago," he replied, meeting her eyes. "Daniel would have told me the same thing. I'm not leaving you to do this alone." Evelyn looked down at the cup, studying the rim as if it might hold an easier answer than either of them had. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why come back and fix everything when you could have done it before, or never come at all?" Silas dropped his gaze to the rough floorboards and exhaled. "Because I'm tired of the hollow that followed his death. I'm tired of how we all let it carve through us. I'm tired of standing on the outskirts of the people I love because I think I'm not worthy. I'm here because I don't want to lose you too." The admission was simple and dangerous. It landed between them like a snowflake, fragile, precise, impossible to ignore. Evelyn felt something unfamiliar and raw loosen in her chest. "You always said family came first," she said, voice small. "Then you left." Silas flinched. "I left because I thought staying would break me. Because every time I saw you I remembered Daniel's last moments. I thought keeping my distance would be penance. But it's been punishment for both of us." She swallowed hard. The anger that had kept her erect and sharp since Daniel's death had softened into something wearier and human. For the first time in a long while, she let herself imagine a life where guilt wasn't the loudest voice she heard. Silas scanned the room, taking in the patched rafters, the stack of better boards he'd left by the shelter, the careful way Evelyn had tried to paper over loss with work. "There's a place at my ranch," he said. "A warm bed, real food, tools that don't split under a nail. You can come there. Stay through the winter. We can figure the rest out later." Evelyn looked away to the broken porch and to where the small grave marker for Daniel lay half buried beneath its rim of snow. "I built a life here," she said. "This land, these memories, they're all I have left of him." Silas stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "And you don't have to give those up to let someone help you keep them," he said gently. "I know you're not asking to be saved. I'm offering company and a pair of hands and someone who'll try not to leave again." She studied him, the set of his mouth, the quiet in his eyes that had nothing to do with stubbornness and everything to do with regret and intention. The offer was not a grand promise, it was a small, practical lifeline, and it came without the theatrics she had braced for. Evelyn's heart pounded, not with fear but with the simple flaring hope that she'd been ashamed to name. "If I go, what will people say?" she asked because she knew the town's tongues were as sharp as any winter wind. Silas gave a humorless half-smile. "Let them say what they please. This is about you. About what keeps you safe." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if not for the way it shook. "And your pride." Silas's hand found the back of the wooden chair and settled there, not moving closer. "Pride can wait. I've been too proud to admit my failures. I'm willing to be less proud if it means less loneliness." Evelyn stared at him a moment longer, weighing the tiny future he was offering. The ranch would mean community, a warm stove, neighbors who could help bring in hay, things she had managed without but which had worn her thin. It also meant change, the kind that might mean rediscovering herself beyond widowhood. Finally she nodded, the motion small but deliberate. One winter. I'll come for winter. Silas's relief was quiet but visible. His shoulders eased for the first time since he'd arrived. That's all I ask. They sat in companionable silence as the light shifted, and for a brief measure the grief that had defined the last 2 years sat with them, accepted rather than consuming. Outside, the snow lay pristine as if the land itself held its breath in hope. As the afternoon faded toward evening, Silas moved to hitch the horses and prepare his wagon. Evelyn fetched a small bundle of belongings she could not bear to leave: Daniel's wool cap, a tin of matches, the photograph tucked in a cracked frame. She hesitated at the threshold of her ruined cabin, touching the lintel as if to memorize the feel of it. Silas paused beside her without crowding her space. "You don't have to sell the place," he said quietly. "You can return when you're ready. I'll help fix it right." Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she folded the photograph into her pocket. "I'll need your help with the roof," she admitted. "And, maybe with the things that scare me, like going into town alone." Silas's jaw softened. "Then we do both. Work first, then the rest." They moved to the wagon together, the decision made like two people stitching a seam, firm, unshowy, practical. It wasn't a declaration of forever. It was an agreement to stop drifting apart because of guilt and silence. As Silas led the horses, Evelyn climbed up into the wagon bed and turned for a last look at the cabin. The shelter stood beside it, a testament to what could be built when hands worked in common. For the first time since Daniel had died, the future felt less like an abyss and more like a path, snowy and uncertain but walkable. Silas climbed up beside her, wrapping the reins across his knees. He didn't take her hand, not yet, but his presence at her side was a vow of sorts. No dramatic words, no sudden confessions. Just company and the promise of steadiness. The horses moved, leaving a single trail of prints behind them that crossed the white field and headed toward the ridge where Silas's ranch waited. The winter air bit sharp and clean, and under it, threaded through the grief, was something like possibility. Evelyn looked at Silas, then at the land they were leaving for the moment, and felt the fragile stirrings of a future she might not have expected. "All right," she said softly. "Let's go." Silas gave a small, almost relieved smile as the wagon rolled away. Outside, the wind slowed as if the world had agreed to give them a chance. The journey to Silas's ranch took most of the day. By the time the wagon rattled through the wooden gate, dusk had sunk into the sky, painting the world in purples and soft blues. Snow still clung to the fences and rooftops, though much of it had melted on the open fields. Smoke curled from the ranch house chimney, promising heat and the kind of comfort Evelyn had not felt in years. Silas stopped the wagon beside the porch and held the reins a moment longer than necessary, as if steadying more than just the horses. "Take your time," he murmured. Evelyn's hands, still tucked inside her worn gloves, trembled slightly as she climbed down. The ranch house stood tall and warm, windows glowing with lamplight. This was Daniel's childhood home. A place Evelyn had only visited once, years ago, before the war, before marriage, before loss had shaped her. She remembered Daniel's stories of it. The orchard behind the barn, the creek that froze solid by midwinter, the way the front porch sang in the wind. For a long moment she simply stood there. Silas unloaded her small bundle of belongings. When he stepped up beside her, he did not touch her or guide her. He simply stood as a steady presence as he had promised. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." He took her inside. The house smelled of pine, cedar smoke and something roasting, rabbit maybe. The warmth wrapped around Evelyn immediately, sinking into her bones. A fire crackled in the fireplace, throwing orange light across the wide planked floor. It felt like walking into a memory she didn't know how to claim. Silas set her things near the hearth, then turned to hang his coat. "I kept the place up," he said almost shyly. "Didn't do much decorating. Figured it wasn't worth it for just me." He paused, then corrected himself quietly. "Wasn't worth it until now." Evelyn swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. A Christmas tree stood in the corner. Not decorated, just a simple pine Silas must have cut that morning. Its presence alone was a kind of welcome. "You got a tree?" she asked, surprised. Silas shrugged with a rough exhale. "Seemed wrong to bring you here without one. Daniel never let a Christmas go without a tree." The memory hit her gently, Daniel laughing as he dragged a too large pine through the snow, insisting it was perfectly sized. She smiled faintly. No, he didn't. Silas tugged off his gloves, moved toward a box tucked near the stairs. Found his old ornaments in the attic. Evelyn stepped closer, heart lifting and aching all at once. When Silas opened the box, she saw them. Daniel's childhood wooden horse, the embroidered star his mother had made, the painted tin bell Daniel used to pretend was a lucky charm. Her fingers brushed the edge of the box. Not quite touching. Just hovering. You okay? Silas asked softly. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't answer. Then she nodded. Let's put them up. Silas handed her the wooden horse first. He didn't try to guide her hand or stand too close, just watched with a kind of reverence as she hung it on a low branch. Then she handed him the tin bell. Your turn. He hung it near the top, the metal clinking gently. Piece by piece they decorated the tree, together. The room filled with something unspoken but warm enough to settle between them like a blanket. When they finished, Evelyn stepped back to look at the tree. It wasn't perfect. It leaned a bit. The lights were uneven. But it glowed with memory and new beginnings both. It's beautiful, she whispered. Silas glanced at her, not the tree, and said, Yes. It is. Later they ate a simple supper by the fire. The storm had quieted outside, leaving only the faintest whisper of wind against the shutters. Evelyn felt the weight of exhaustion but also a steadying peace she hadn't known she needed. Silas poured her warm cider from a kettle. When their hands brushed, neither of them pulled away immediately. I hope, Silas said slowly, that you feel safe here. You can stay as long as you need. Longer if you decide. Evelyn met his gaze fully. Silas? I didn't expect any of this when I woke up yesterday in that broken cabin. Me neither, he admitted. His voice held a rough sincerity. But maybe that's how grace works. Comes when we're too stubborn to ask. Evelyn's eyes softened. Daniel would want us to take care of each other. Not out of guilt, but because life is too short to live alone. Silas inhaled, steady and deep, as if those words silenced something inside him that had rattled for years. If you want, when winter ends we can rebuild your cabin right. Together. I'd like that, she said. I don't know what the future holds. But I know I don't want to face it alone anymore. Silas nodded, a quiet, relieved smile touching his lips. Then we start from here. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, gentle flakes drifting through the dark like blessings. Evelyn leaned back in the rocking chair, warmth spreading across her chest. She wasn't healed. She wasn't suddenly whole. But she was anchored again, steadied by shared grief and something new growing slowly between her and Silas. Something cautious. Something hopeful. She looked at the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner and whispered, Merry Christmas, Daniel. Silas didn't ask what she said. He just added wood to the fire and sat beside her, close enough to share warmth but far enough to respect her ache. And for the first time in 2 long, cold years, Evelyn felt that Christmas was not about what she had lost, but about what she still had the courage to build.